Hello and welcome to my world building series. I believe this is day 5, and we're going to be looking more at Ta-Nagasei, which is what I've named this world. And I have been thinking about things, and I jotted down some notes, and I'm just going to read a couple of them to you and improv as I am wont to do. And we're going to be looking at the non-magical kingdom today of Ta-Nagasei, which may be confusing, might rename it later, but we'll see. And I wanted to talk about the military structure. And I don't want it to be like every other thing that I've created. So I'm going to mix things up a little. As you'll remember, the world is in a fantasy, science fantasy kind of era at this point. But the non-magical kingdom, it's in an industrial revolution without magic because non-magical. But I did say that there would be dinosaurs, maybe the size of horses, possibly the size of oxen or buffalo, that kind of thing, which were used as beasts of burden, amongst other things. And I was thinking that that would be quite fun to use, that it would, when the continent was split in two and the other continental shelves were formed, that these dinosaurs, some of them would stay within the magical kingdom instead of horses. But I was thinking the other day, and when I say the other day, I'm really talking about yesterday or the day before, it would be quite fun to have some aerial cavalry as well. So I was thinking griffins. So we'll have dinosaurs on land and griffins in the air. Probably not pegasi. Certainly not hippogriffs. I kind of want to leave horses out entirely from this one. But we'll see. They might be on a different continent. Anyway, so we're going to have some griffin cavalry. And let me see. So the dinosaurs, some of them will be working in mines before the steam engines take over. And train tracks are going to be used with cogs to drive the road carriages. So what we're going to be calling them, road carriages. But it's cheaper to use dinosaurs. And so many of them are used. Now, why is it cheaper? Because there's a lot of grasslands out there, and to actually extract the metal and then put it through the factories and get it molded and so on, it takes money. It takes time. It also takes wood for the fuel. And so until mass production reaches a point where everybody can afford it, it's kind of a status thing. So the middle class and the upper class, they will all have road carriages. And everybody else will be riding on dinosaurs. I mean, why not? And some of the dinosaurs will be drawing carriages and buses and wagons and so on. And I think some of the nobility would probably ride dinosaurs. But those would probably be the military, or those who are going hunting. Anyway, for the Griffin cavalry, I'm going to have there be some lancers. And I was thinking, well, how do I want this military to look? How do I want to structure it? And this is what I decided. I decided that there would be 3 major divisions, and they would be called the Azure Lance, the Amber Spears, and the Amethyst Bows. I mean, theme it. Why not? And there will be 20 banners. And these banners will be the legions of the kingdom. The legions of Ta-Nagasei. And the land is going to be ruled by a great council, known as the Circle of the Conclave. And they're going to take this tradition from the original city before it was split, before it was cut in half by the magical cataclysm. And these counselors, these great counselors, these grand counselors, the great council that rules the land, these oligarchs, they're going to be drawn from 7 great houses. And there will be 3 grand generals who answer to the Council of War. And the Council of War will be another name for the Circle of the Conclave, but only when the council is actually at war. The rest of the time, it will just be called the Circle or the Conclave or something like that. And of course, we can mix these names up and we can throw in some regional specific names. And we can add in some fantasy names. But right now, we're going to be calling it the Circle and the Conclave. And that's probably what most people will call it. And these armies, because there are going to be 5 main armies, these armies are going to have a Grand Master to lead them. So the Grand Masters will answer to the 3 Grand Generals. I hope you're keeping up here. So we have a council of oligarchs drawn from the 7 great houses. And beneath these, there are going to be 3 Grand Generals. And beneath these are going to be the 5 main armies. And each main army is going to have a Grand Master. And the 5 main armies are going to be the Sky Legion, the Homeland Guard, the Sea Guard, the Espionage and Intelligence Branch, and the Royal Guard Regiment. Now, I'm sure that I will come up with some different names for these, but these are the work in progress names that I'm using right now. So the Homeland Guard is going to have auxiliary militia, and they're going to employ mercenary units, notably private regiments, which swear loyalty to the council and to the realm. And they are going to be trained at specialist schools to augment the regulars. And these auxiliaries tend to be elite units. They tend to be highly trained elite units, irregulars, if you like. So they specialize in something. And they fall outside of the 3 main divisions, which would be the lancers, the spears, and the bows. Now, there is going to be a tension between these elite units and the Royal Guard. And the Royal Guard are trained at specialist royal academies scattered throughout the land. But the Homeland Guard acts as the town and city guard, and they patrol the roads and they police the realm. So they kind of double up as a civilian police force, as a reserve, but also the main rank and file. So in a way, they're a little like a levy. And so when they're not in times of war, they're just acting as regular police. But during times of war, they get called up, sort of like the reserve. And so this is what keeps them active. This is what keeps them trained. As to the rest of the armies, well, the 5 armies with their 3 divisions are organized into the 20 banners. And each is kind of a military order with various chapter houses in every single city, or at least most cities. And each army, each of the 5 armies, have 4 banners. But this is a little deceptive because the Homeland and the Sky Legion field the greatest numbers. But in terms of equipment, because equipment is quite important, it's one thing to name an army, but how are you going to equip them? What logistics do they have? Well, the polearm is going to be one of the primary weapons, and the fire lance is going to be the other primary weapon. And this is where we have the azure lance, or azure lancers. And so they're going to be using the fire lance. And you could be saying, well, why didn't you name it something fiery? Well, I just wanted to call them azure lancers. Maybe we can say that the magic that they use They're embedded with some kind of magic rock which draws on magic, or maybe they're only used by magic people in the other kingdom. Maybe that's why they were originally called Azure Lancers. Maybe this is a very, very old division from before the split. And like other traditions which carry on into the modern world, this has also carried on. And so rather than break with tradition, even though they don't use magic, they're still using the same names. They're still in that tradition. Or maybe it's for their heraldry. Maybe they were always called the Azure Lancers, and they were riding on their dinosaurs and charging into battle. And the fact that they might be using gunpowder to create fire lances is neither here nor there. The point is they're called the Azure Lance. Now, the spears, the amber spears, they are a bit misleading. And so when you hear the word or the term amber spears, you probably think that the military divisions, they just use spears, but this is not true. What happens is they use polearms, and over time the spear was developed because the spear is a very, very simple weapon. And so they developed the spear into glaives and into halberds, and sometimes you'd have military forks, you might even have tridents. And the way it was developed is they started changing the spears. Sometimes they put on an axe head. Sometimes they put on a hammerhead. Sometimes they put on a mace head. They even put on a shovel. Sometimes they put on a crescent or two crescents. And so it began as spears. And yes, there are still spears there, but spears developed, and nobody wanted to change the name from amber spears to amber polearms or amber poleaxes. So they just kept it as amber spears. And in the same way, the amethyst bow or amethyst bows, they're archers, and archers are an elite force in this world because it takes many, many years to train a competent archer. And the most elite of these are the cavalry archers, not merely the ones on land, but the ones in the sky. But by and large, there are four main types of bows. And the first bow is the crossbow. And because things have become industrialized, the crossbow can be mass produced. And one of the advantages of the crossbow is it can store a pre-loaded bolt, so you don't have to load it. And so it fires it. All you have to do is wind it up. And so they have developed crossbows. And they can also fire multiple bolts because they have a clip, the repeating crossbow. And so it doesn't take a lot of skill. And we're going to say that it takes maybe 5 weeks to learn how to use the Ta-Nagasei crossbow to a relative degree of efficiency. And they tend to fire these in volleys. And so you have the crossbow. And some of these crossbowmen, they have shields. Some of them don't. And the shields vary in size. But they are your rank and file. And so the crossbow is a standard weapon. It doesn't take a lot of skill. Their people are not very respected. They're seen something as cannon fodder, to be perfectly honest. And one of the things that they like about the crossbow is it fires without causing smoke, and it still works when it's raining. And so in some ways, it's favored over the fire lance. But the fire lance is used by the cavalry. And so the fire lancers are almost a cross between dragoons and traditional lancers, I would say, in our world. But then we have the short bow. And the short bow tends to be used by those who are riding. So immediately they are more respected. There's also the longbow. And the longbow it is an elite weapon, but it really has its status as being a weapon of skill. And because it's a weapon of skill, it's something that some of the nobility practice. They look down on those who use the crossbow because it takes time to learn the longbow. And so anybody who can use the longbow is seen as being very, very well-to-do, very skilled. And so what's happened in our social classes is you have a level of gentry. These aren't upper nobility. They're not even middle nobility. These are lower nobility. And they spend their afternoons, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, practicing the longbow. And they're a military class. So when they are called up to battle, they will leave behind their homes and they will go and they will form battalions and they will cloud the air with a rain of arrows. Of course, they hold some political power, some influence, because they're an entire class. Individually, they're not very powerful. But there is a tension between them and the middle class. But many of these longbowmen, they actually double up as merchants. And the reason for this is they need money in order to maintain their position as gentry. And so over the centuries, they recognize that there is reserve and they can't lead a life of leisure. So they lead a life of commerce while practicing the longbow. And so the longbow has become a symbol of the merchants. And so they are a kind of merchant army, if you like. And this makes it very interesting because even though they are part of the 5 main armies, and all of the 5 main armies have this, they're also merchants. And so they supply much of the funds through taxes to these armies. And the way they get around paying taxes to the crown is by paying taxes to the army because they field their own equipment and they help supply the armies. And so they've secured their place in society. So nobody is going to touch them. And so they get a lot of tax breaks. But then there's the fourth type of crossbow, and this is the ballista. And so they operate siege works. And of course, there's also catapults and other things, but the ballista is a giant crossbow. And so these are the 4 bows which make up the amethyst bow. And one of the things that I really want to do with these 5 armies is have conflict. So there's going to be political conflict between them. And the different houses will all have different sons and daughters, if I'm including women in these armies, and I may not. I may put the women somewhere else. I think I will do that because in many of my stories, I have the armies fielding both men and women. So I think this time I will just have the men inside the non-magical kingdom. I think the women will do something else. The women may actually serve as politicians. That would be quite interesting, I think. I think the women will be in politics. So all of the ministers and the chancellors and the chancellor's aides, they can all be women, whereas all of the men will be in the military. And I say all the men, I don't mean all the men because you still have to have the agriculture and so on. But I think the military families and the noble families, I think this will be the way things will work. So the men will be military officers and the women will be civic officers. And that will be where the politics come from. And you'll have men on the council of oligarchs and you'll have women on the council of oligarchs, I should say. And so this will be how society is divided in the kingdom of Ta-Nagasei. And this will cause a lot of social strife because not every man wants to have a military career if he wants to have influence, but that's how it's going to be. And I think the way around this would be the merchant military longbow ears. longbow ears, longbow men. We'll come up with something. Boas, I should probably say. So that's how I'm going to structure this kingdom. And they're probably going to have guilds as well. And those guilds will probably focus on things like cotton or linen, certainly focus on food. And I think that food will be an industrial thing. And I think that the dinosaurs will be subject to animal husbandry. And so there'll be guilds of that too. And I think the military will have quite a stake in the griffins and in the land dinosaurs. And so will the civic realm. And I think there'll probably be some kind of crossover between them. And I may have military stables and royal stables and civic stables. And this will be something different because everybody is using beasts of burden, cavalry, livestock. But the question is, which sphere does it fall under? And I think having them fall under all three spheres will be more interesting than simply saying that all livestock belongs to the military or all livestock belongs to the politicians and the military has to lease it. So that will add some nuance. And then I can look at whether or not these things are subject to trade and what the tariffs are and so on. But I think that will be enough for the non-magical kingdom for the time being. So just to recap, we have the Council of the Conclave, and this is made up of men and women. Now, the men are military officials and the women are civic officials. And the women dabble in politics. And so we have the 5 main armies, and those are the Sky Legion, the Homeland Guard, the Sea Guard, the Royal Regiment, and what was the other one? Let me just check here. The Espionage and Intelligence Branch. Now, this might be the one army which does employ women covertly. And of course, they'll probably have, shall we say, hired knives? But we can talk about that later. So there'll be a lot of spies, obviously with a name like intelligence and espionage. But these armies, these 5 armies will be divided into 4 banners. And banners are legions. It's just another word for it in this world. So there's 20 banners, the legions of the kingdom. And their goal is to protect the realm. 7 main or great noble houses. A merchant military class, which uses the longbow, and other classes of nobility, other industry. So that's what we've covered today. I hope it's been enjoyable, and I look forward to developing this world some more. But I wanted to ask you, while I still have your attention, would you like to learn how to build a world? Would you like to learn how to write? Because I offer specific classes. I teach creative writing. I teach how to world build. I teach how to write. I teach how to write faith, if you're a Christian. And I also do one-to-ones. And that's mentorship, that's coaching, that's consulting. And if any of this resonates with you and you're interested, do drop me a line. Reach out. I would love to help you develop your story. I specialize in fantasy and science fiction, as you may have guessed. And specifically, I am looking for new and aspiring writers of fantasy and science fiction, Christian writers who want to learn how to fight, who want to learn how to write faith. How do you go about doing that? And if you're a Christian writer who has got stuck, feel free to reach out. I do also help people with nonfiction writing. If you've got a book in you and you want to learn how to write it, reach out. Whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction. I would love to hear where you're at and see how I can help. So drop me a line. Anyway, I will see you guys later. Bye for now.